Okay, can you see my screen? Oh,
Yes.
great. All right. So this is about automating user management, user access to apps. Um, so as I started out with one app and a few users, that's pretty easy. And then it ballooned to many, many, many apps and many users. And I had to come up with a strategy or it's going to drive me crazy. So, first of all, just if we have never met, my name's Tyler Brezler. So, I work at MIT. I have a background in finance, research administration, data engineering, lots of different stuff. Mostly working in the business intelligence space now. Been working with Quickbase for over a decade. I presented at a couple of different Empowers. You may have seen me at one of those. MIT has a pretty big Quickbase community here. We have our own Qrew. So I run that. I'm a member of the Boston Qrew. Shout out to Tammy, who is here with us. She runs our Boston Qrew. She does a great job. If you're not part of a Qrew, check it out, especially if we live in a metro area. And then I have so much Quickbase swag, I can't even keep track of it all. My wife was going out the other day and she couldn't find a winter hat to wear. And I was like, you could just look in my Quickbase bag full of winter gear. It's like pick your choice of Quickbase hat that you would like to wear. There's a lot of different colors. So yeah, I have more Quickbase swag than I can even keep track of at this point. So as I mentioned, as my apps kind of blew up and my user base expanded, keeping track of that can be tricky. Uh, I kind of, personally, I wanted to focus more on app building and less on sort of like the minutia of like, who's doing what. Like, so, you design those
Okay.
roles
Listen.
and
Yeah.
you, you create roles that are ideally not individual specific. Um, but sometimes that's how you start out. So, Joe has access to this, Sally has access to this, et cetera, et cetera. Um, but certainly, as your app, ecosystem grows, as your user base grows, you might not be in touch with exactly what's happening in your org. So I don't work in HR, so this is something that has happened to me. I don't know who's still here. Like I work with people on projects, but some people I don't see for a while, especially if you're working remote or they're working remote. You might not be up to date, but HR certainly would. So one thing you guys can do right now before even automating anything is just look into user groups. So if you're not leveraging user groups and you have a lot of users, I would definitely check it out. You basically put people into groups or buckets. You add the group to the app. You don't add the person. When you add the person to the group, now that they're part of the group, they have access to the app. And so, the groups, you can assign them the same level of roles that you would an individual. But now you're not deleting stuff, excuse me, from apps. You're deleting users from groups. So this whole thing that I created all centers around groups. And if you've never created a group, I just want to briefly walk you through it. This is definitely one of those things that has not been updated in a long time at Quickbase. I'm not sure where it is on the future list of improvements. It's a little bit clunky, so I'm just outlining the steps here. Um, I'm not going to necessarily like demo it, but you guys can have this slide deck after the presentation. Obviously, these are recorded. You could go back and watch it. It's not that tricky. It's just kind of knowing where to click and how to select things. One thing I don't mention here is that I believe group names are like a global thing. So if you select a group name that somebody else has already used, you'll have to come up with a different idea. Um, Once you create your group, you can then add as many users as you want to the group. And that's kind of how you manage it. It's not that difficult, but at the same time, what I have found personally is that the things that I don't think are difficult can be difficult to other people. So one of the things I ran into was like I tried to pass this kind of like group management thing off to HR because, like I said, they know who's being hired, they know who's leaving. It seems like that would make the most sense, or somebody in the HR space, right? And basically just make it part of the onboarding, offboarding process. Somebody comes in, you assign them a role, and then you add them to the different groups that they need to get into the data in Quickbase. But honestly, one of the things I kept running into was that HR person's like, how do I do this? And I'd write down the instructions. I'm like, I lost the instructions. So after doing that dance a few times, I was like, I can figure this out. I can make this like as simple as possible. So one of the things that I did, and if you're going to use this solution that I have, I recommend this. Maybe you already have one of these, but a personnel app. So it doesn't have to be super complicated. Essentially, what I'm doing with my personnel app is just adding people as they join. So I've got at a minimum the email that's going to be associated with your organization, which is tied to your Quickbase domain. And then like some kind of job role or function, right? So if they work in finance, you would give them the finance role. You can go more granular than that if you want. So, they could be a finance assistant or a finance director or whatever. But you would sort of assign them a role in your personnel app. And then that is a little less, techie or code, whatever. Anybody can do that, right? Type in an email address and then add their job role. So that is 100% something HR can do, requires basically no explanation. So the personnel app is kind of where I started, just kind of organizing all my people, and then I can help use that to organize my Quickbase access. So here's a screenshot. I can show you guys live after I do sort of this little, broad overall presentation thing. But essentially, this is what you would see in the personnel app. Above it is the fields where you would enter the person's name and email address and stuff. And then it will automatically pull up their Quickbase user ID once you put in their email address. And I'll show you, there's like a formula that you use to do that. If they don't have a Quickbase ID, then they've never used Quickbase, or they've never used it within your domain, and you'll have to provision them. And I'll walk you through that as well. But then you can see like the roles. It's a multi-select or multiple choice, so you can put in tons of different roles. I know there's like a hard limit, and then you would have to come up with a solution for that if you exceed that in terms of roles. But for me right now, this has worked fine. We have a number of financial assistants and a number of financial coordinators and et cetera, et cetera. So here's sort of the workflow. Basically, person's hired. HR would then add them to the personnel app, select the job category, check the box that says, we want to give them Quickbase access. And either one of two things, they have a Quickbase ID or they do not. And so the main difference is that if they don't have a Quickbase ID, they need to be provisioned. Now, the nice thing is that there is a provision API, which I'll show you. And you can use that as part of the automation. If they already have an ID, then you don't need to provision them. You just need to add them to the corresponding groups. And then once you do that, they have access to the apps that they need because they're part of the groups. So in order to get the user ID and the group ID, so you you type in their email address, and then that second step you see there, user to ID, and then it's to user. So to user, if you put the email inside of to user, you will get the Quickbase user, and then user to ID gives you the Quickbase ID. Super simple formula. Again, if it comes up blank, they don't have one. Then again, like I just showed you, you select from the multiple choice field which job title they want. Then it's going to use a case function. So if you never use case functions, definitely look into them. They're great. So based on the job category, so if it's financial assistant, then the group ID is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You can get the group IDs. I think that's one thing I missed was where to get the group ID, and it's from the URL field when you go into the group itself, into the group management. But I can show you that. So essentially, you use the one formula to get the user ID, and the other one to get the group ID. And those are the two things you need essentially to move on to the next step, whereas that's where it goes to the pipeline. So like I said, if they've never used Quickbase or not within your domain, they won't have an ID, and you'll need to provision one. So you would use the provision user. It's a HTTP API, so the old API. This is the formula that you would use, minus the app token. So you need the person's email address, their first name and last name. And one of the things you do need to do is they have to be provisioned somewhere, right? So you have to provision them to a app that you have. My goal is to get away from managing the minutia of users, like adding and deleting. So I didn't want to add them to an app and then have to delete them from it later. So I just created a dummy app. And I thought to myself, well, okay, so this whole thing is part of they've never used Quickbase before, right? They don't have an ID. So why not create a welcome to Quickbase app for my org? And here is essentially what it looks like. There's nothing in here, really. So there's a dashboard. It just says, welcome to Quickbase. I add them to this app. There's no data in it. So I don't care. Like if I forget to delete them later, it doesn't really matter. But that is a key thing. You got to provision them somewhere. So I just provision them as a participant in this little dummy app that I have. But then I can also use this. So I can add them to this app and then say, hey, go read this little blurb about what we're doing with Quickbase. And it gives them a link to the My Apps page so they can go there. So I'm going to run that API, that HTTP API provision user. And that will, once it runs, if it runs successfully, boom, they have an ID now. They don't need to do anything. They don't need to log in. They're in. It creates a user ID from that one step. Now, the thing is, I still need to get that ID that was just created. One of the things I found that was kind of interesting was I provisioned them, I ran that API, then I went back to my personnel app to see if that formula field would work now. And it didn't. And I'm like, wait a minute, why didn't this work? Where is their user ID? And it turns out that that existing personnel app, it takes a bit for it to catch up. So there's something going on in the background, essentially, that the personnel app that I already had created, it just didn't have the ID yet. It wasn't showing up there. And so I had to do a lot of playing around with it. And so what I found was if I created a new record in that dummy app, that welcome app that I just created, and that's the app where I provisioned them, their user ID would show up there. So what I would do is I would provision them to this dummy app. Then I have a table that's called new users or whatever. They can't even see it, right? It's hidden. And I just add a new record there. And I use that same formula, that user to ID formula. And when I did that in that table that I provisioned them to, the user ID was there immediately, right away. I didn't have to wait. And then I also pulled in the pipeline step. Again, I'll show you how this all works. But I pulled from the pipeline step that group ID that they were supposed to be assigned. And now I have their brand new user ID and their group ID. So now I can add them to the group. So I just run a search record step. Essentially, it looks in that new dummy app in the new users table, finds that record that I just created, gets the user ID, gets the group ID, then it runs a second API. This one's a REST API for user management. And it runs the API you see here. So it's the groups API. And it's real simple. It's just you put the group ID in the URL and the user ID in the body. And that's basically it. And then it adds them to the group. So this is just like the new users. You can see, I added myself here. So I've got the Quickbase user ID. I've got the group ID. That's really all I need in order to add them to a group. So the last step is obviously, the idea behind this is like HR that's doing it, right? All this stuff's running in the background. I wanted the user to know that they now had access. So I just set up a welcome to Quickbase notification that's triggered. So it sends out this little automated email. Like I said, they've already been added to this welcome app. There's information there. There's information here. Hopefully it's enough. It points them to the My Apps page. They can go in and explore it. Now, there's also some more information here in the email you can't see that says, hey, contact Tyler Brezler if you have questions about Quickbase, because I'm running everything. but at least I know they're going to get access to stuff. And of course, I have documentation for a department on what the different apps do. That's always a work in progress, so we're still building that out. But this is like, at least it gets them going, right? And another cool thing about this is like, so like I said, HR is doing this when they're hired, not a month after they started when they happen to notify me or somebody says, hey, I heard about this Quickbase thing. I don't have access to that yet. So you make it part of your onboarding, offboarding process. If the person is already in Quickbase, they already have an ID, you don't need to provision them. You just need to add them to the group. So in that case, they've already used Quickbase. Maybe they don't have as many questions. I'm still going to send them the welcome to Quickbase email that shows, here's why we're using it in MIT biology, and just to let them know, okay, now you have access to all of biology's apps. So yeah, and you can also do other stuff. So what if somebody moves up, they get promoted, they change roles? You can use this. Again, HR is going to know about that before I do. They can go in, change the person's role. It's going to update the user group. It's going to trigger that same pipeline. And essentially, it's going to remove them from their old group and add them to the new group. And so, it's going to look, does the previous Quickbase user group ID not match the current one?
Hey, Tyler, I think you
Yeah.
had a question from Jim
Oh,
in the
yeah.
chat.
Sorry. Yeah, I didn't see the chat. Sorry, I had that hidden. Um, let's see. So yeah, am I hearing the two user formula needs to be looked at before the ID is gotten? Well, no. So essentially, what you need to know is that formula, the two user and then two user two ID formula, if you use that in the app where you're provisioning the user, you will get their ID immediately. If you're using that in a different app that you already created before and the user hasn't been added to that yet, it won't show up until after an hour, 2 hours. Yes, and of course, formulas don't run in the background on their own. But yeah, I think you guys are kind of following what I'm saying here. Um,
That was a nuance that I
yeah,
thought was interesting, that uh, formulas are something that you have to actually be in the record for it to run, and that it doesn't work on its own. So I was wondering if that was what you were noting there, was that so the
yeah,
user ID does provision properly when you send the invitation, when you provision them, they get an
yes,
idea immediately, and it's based off their email address and some other fanciness,
yes.
but then it
So
doesn't fill out in the spoke of what you're proposing, right? So all those other user ID fields stay blank for a while. That's interesting.
yeah, all I can tell you, and again, so I'm showing this to you guys because this kind of took me a little bit of time to figure like I had to play around with this. Um, so so like I said, I had that personnel app and I have that formula field there. What I did was I provisioned the user and then I went back to that app and I interacted with that person's record. I opened it up. I interacted with the formula. I interacted with the record. I saved it. The formula did not work. Um, so it works. And again, it showed up then I don't know, it was an hour later. I wasn't timing it, but it was like an hour later, 2 hours later. It eventually showed up in that app. So the idea of like formulas don't trigger unless you interact with them, I assume that's true, but also the way that the user ID kind of populates to the other apps, there's something going on in the background. Um, you may be able to use apply regular expression. Um, anyway, I'm just clarifying that because that user to ID formula is it's just a little bit wonky for when you are provisioning a new user. And that tripped me up. That's super like I've again, so eventually I was like, well, what if I use that formula in the app that I'm provisioning them to? And that worked. That was sort of the secret step that I figured out to get all of this to work. Um, So, and then obviously the last thing is if somebody leaves, you would either delete them from your personnel app or mark them for deletion or however you do it. And then it's going to trigger the same thing. And then it's just going to go through and remove them from the group. And then they're gone. They don't have access to any of your apps anymore. So yeah, key takeaways, essentially managing groups, highly recommended if you're using a lot of people. I understand there are going to be situations where like, Ben needs this level of access, but the same person, the same role is going to need, and if you have to get that granular, you have to do it. But if you can find a way to standardize everything, put people in buckets, it makes your life a lot easier. Highly recommend a personnel app if you don't have one. If you are provisioning someone, you have to provision them somewhere. So, like I said, I use a dummy app. So new users, you want to let them know that they have access. Otherwise, they're not. You can provision. So that's one of the things. You can use this provision user API. They have no idea. It's all happening in the background. They will not know. Quickbase doesn't send them an automated alert. So you want to do that. And then you can automate all your other user group changes and deletions. So let's jump into Quickbase and actually take a look at some stuff. This is that app. Here's the personnel app. One thing, this is cool, but is not part of this demonstration, but I built a connection with our MIT directory into Quickbase. So I can actually like search for people and then it populates all their information. Again, I wanted to make this as easy as possible for HR. So they just search for someone in our directory and then it pulls everything in, automatically adds their ID and email. Once you add the email address, this user ID will hopefully populate unless they've never used it before. You grant Quickbase access, select your role. Now we're the pipelines crew. So let's get into pipelines. I'm going to walk you through this and you tell me if it's getting too boring or whatever. But okay, so if they are added or modified, I am personally not deleting people. I'm marking them for deletion. I get really antsy around my data getting deleted by just random people. I kind of, but you mark it for deletion and then I go through and make sure it gets deleted. This is just like a safety step. So I have a little flag for deletion checkbox that's included in all the records. Or if somebody has been marked as like, this is the date of last employment or something. But essentially, it's going to look and see, was grant Quickbase access checked, right? If it's not, then we don't care because they should not have and not everybody gets Quickbase access, only the people who are going to use the apps. And then the other thing it's going to look at is that Quickbase user group ID. So one thing, this is another little thing, I didn't mention this previously, but what I'm doing is I had this formula. This is that case formula. So it says, if you're the director, you go into this group and it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then I have a form rule set up here that it copies it to this text field. So when the record is saved, this is permanent. This stays here. So that when because the formula, you don't really want to work with formulas necessarily. Like when you're using like previous values in your pipelines, I'm pretty sure you can't do previous values on a formula, right? But you can on a text field. So that's why you want to keep track of your user group ID as it changes. So every time you change this changes, it updates it here so that when you save it, it gets fed to your pipeline correctly. So the pipeline is going to pull in this text field and it's going to do, so this is, again, one thing I will say, I'm sure this has been covered a ton. You could turn this pipeline that I created easily into at least 3 different pipelines. If you have hundreds of pipelines, sometimes you decide you want to condense them just to make your life easier. But also, these pipelines can get pretty complicated. So it's kind of your workflow, how you like to work. The first thing I want to do, is this a new record? So I have a conditional that says was created at less than 10 seconds ago. So that lets me know, was this person just added? Let's say they were. Now it goes to this second conditional. Grant access is yes, and Quickbase user ID is null. So if those 2 things are true, we're going to provision the user. And here is that URL, right? So it's just like I showed you. I'm provisioning them to that welcome app. I need their email address, their first name and their last name, and I have the role ID. It's just participant, but that can be whatever you want. Don't forget your app token. So very standard XML. Now, if they do have a Quickbase user ID, I'm not going to provision them, but I am going to add them to the app. So similar API call, just add user to role, right? So same role. And here I know what their Quickbase ID because they already have one. So that's going to run. It's going to pause for 5 seconds. Probably not necessary. Sometimes I throw pauses in here just in case, short pauses. Now it's going to create that new record that I showed you in the new user. So it's going to fill out. I've got their full name. That's just for me. You don't really need it, but I like to know who I added. I'm tracking their MIT ID. I have their email address. And then that Quickbase user ID, right? So I'm pulling that from here into the pipeline. Now I'm going to add that to this new record. Again, it's going to pause. Then it's going to search for that record that I just created in the dummy app. It's going to say, find me that user. And then it's going to run the API to add the user to the group. Now, this is the REST API. So we can see this is the groups API. This is the group ID. We're going to make them a member. Then when we scroll down, here's the body. Here's the user ID. So we know we have that because it was just created. Then I added a little checkbox that just says that it ran. That's totally optional. You could probably get rid of that. That was kind of as I was testing it out. You add these little things like visual cues. And then lastly, it sends that. It basically checks a checkbox in the personnel record down here. This is the hidden part. Send a welcome email. Checks that. That triggers that email to go out. And that is the new user step. Now, it also does other things. So if we go back up. Here. Okay. So this is if it is a new record, if it was just created. What if it's not? What if it was modified or deleted? Now we're going to look at some other things. So it was either if it's not new, then that means their user group changed or they're leaving, one or the other. So if grant access is yes, meaning they do have Quickbase access, but they weren't flagged for deletion, they're not leaving. That means that they change groups. So if the group ID has changed, it's going to run an API, add user to new group, and then delete user from previous group. So the delete API, same API. But here we're going to call the previous value. So again, crucial thing to have this text field so we can keep track of what the previous value was. So we're going to delete them from the previous group. And then the only difference is the method's going to be delete, right? User ID is still in the body. That doesn't change. That's pretty much the same thing. So that's if they're changing groups. And then we go over here. So if grant access was revoked, that was changed from yes to no, or they are flagged for deletion, we just want to, before we run it, so if you try to run an API and you don't have a value to input into one of these, you will get an error. So first we want to check, does this group ID have a value? If it does, then we can run the APIs and we're great. So if the group ID had a value and we're either revoking their access or they're leaving, then we're just going to delete them, right? So it's that same delete API. If it doesn't have a value, did the previous thing have a value? So maybe what happened was this got unchecked and this was turned using the form rule, this was made blank because they're no longer part of a group. We still want to know, was the previous group, is that something we have to look into? And again, it's going to run that same API, but it's also going to use this previous user group ID to delete them. And of course, if nothing existed, then it's just going to go through to the end. So we basically covered new users, changes to user groups or changes to roles, and then deletion. And this pipeline does all of those three things. And again, you could definitely break this out into multiple pipelines. You could have one for added, one for modified, one for deleted. Just kind of depends on how you like to manage things. For me, again, I have so many pipelines to keep track of. I have found it helpful to condense, consolidate some things where it makes sense. And so for this, it's kind of like, oh, all of my user group management is happening in this one pipeline. And, going back to my original point, when, I basically show HR this app and say, okay, part of your onboarding and offboarding process is managing this. So as soon as you know somebody's joining, somebody in HR has to add them to this app. Very straightforward. If they should have Quickbase access, grant it, select their role, hit save. You don't have to do anything else. So I have some other things here, right? So if they're part of our ERP system and they're going to actually like be a manager on one of our accounts, they can do that. That goes to a different app. That's not really part of the pipeline. That's more just kind of like, what I'm doing with the personnel app, which is very helpful. And that all helps me just kind of like stay organized in terms of like who's doing what and how it affects the different users in MIT biology. So okay, that's pretty much it. Open for questions.
Got some good feedback here, good logic. Tammy's mentioning she doesn't even want to give anybody deleting rights. But yeah, this is really great. I love that you put us all on a deck that we can certainly share. So feel free, when you're done, share that over and I'll put that as part of the recap so that folks can follow along because I think it's very smart. You don't always see everything all consolidated into one so smoothly and easy to follow because sometimes we get lost with all the different branches. So I get it.
I have a question. If you could go back in time in your DeLorean to talk to Tyler Brezler from the past, would you do anything differently with when you like just if you're starting out, like using user groups differently than what you've got now? I feel like it's one of those things where once you get started on it, it's kind of hard to unravel. So like you kind of have to have a good plan with like how you're going to start it out.
I mean, I think so. You can only work with the knowledge that you have on hand. When I started out with Quickbase, again, it was 10 years ago. So a lot of the documentation and the helpful videos, you guys have done an amazing job beefing that up, but it wasn't where it is today. You know what I mean? And so a lot of this, I was just kind of like playing around and learning stuff as I go. And, somebody mentioned with like deleting stuff, soft deletes, those kind of, a lot of those lessons you learn the hard way.
Yeah.
Right. Something gets deleted. And so in terms of managing user groups, if I had the knowledge I have now, I would have implemented that from the start, 100%, for sure. But, yeah, like anything, I had to kind of, figure it out the hard way. And it was definitely a situation where like, I was like, once I started building more and more apps, and I know, well, this person needs access to this app, but they only need this level of access. And going through, and I would have 50 people in each of those apps, and there's like a dozen, 20 apps, whatever. It's a lot to juggle. And it got to be a point where like I was doing so much of that work and I felt like I wasn't really keeping good track of it. And I was like, this is definitely something HR could do better, but I need to give them the tools to do it. That was kind of the takeaway. And yeah, if I could go back in time and teach myself all of this stuff, that would be amazing. But yeah, that's all part of the process. You kind of make those mistakes and, figure out how to make it better.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, I was just thinking like if, it probably varies based on where you work, how departments are sort of configured and teams are designed. Like you might have different groups that require different apps or even subgroups within those that are, a specialty. Like I feel like that was just one of the things I was just wondering about if you were like, yeah, I wish I had mapped out just kind of like different subgroups that I could have designed.
I like that he called it a dummy app. I think it's a welcome app.
Yeah.
It applies to everybody in the group, no matter what permissions you should have, no matter what permissions you shouldn't have. This is just where we start. And that's a nice way to, get everybody in who needs to be in and not worry too much about giving access to things that aren't relevant or shouldn't be shared. So it's not a pipeline tip, but I think that's a good process to implement when you can.
I would say that in terms of the groups, I'm sure a roadblock, and I mentioned this a few times, but like trying to get away from that kind of like individual level minutia access is tricky. And I think there's going to be a lot of orgs where there's like pushback on that. But there's a lot of advantages to standardizing people's roles and what they have access to. And part of it is going to have to be like, well, let's take a second look at, again, trying to bucket people, trying to group them. So now I only have one director. So like the director of the whole department, right? So she gets her own role. I mean, is that necessary? No, but also I like to keep it so that it's part of the process. Because I could just add her to the app, and then obviously we're not turning over directors on a regular basis, but like also it's just like this is a standard thing that I set up. So even she gets in a group. It's a group of one, but it's just that's the process.
And it's good to keep to those patterns, those standards. Absolutely.
Yeah. So some of the groups are groups of 2 people. I mean, again, you might say to yourself, well, like, oh, that's, what's the point of having it? And it's kind of like, yeah, but some of the groups are groups of 20 people. And so it's just keeping that process standardized. And the whole point of this is automation. And again, this is a struggle I have with people. They're like, I want to automate this, but also I want everything to be customized like to an insane degree. And I'm like, those 2 things do not work together. So we need to standardize it or automate it, but it's, you have to like one follows the other. But I mean, it's again, a lot of you guys are probably coming from various size organizations. If you're really small, this isn't going to be as essential. But as you grow, and honestly, like Ben, to your point, you're saying like, well, if you go back in time, something that's worth considering is that even if you are small now, you might not be permanently. So implementing these things now could save you pain down the road.
I kind of agree with that. I'm all about the group roles. And the reason for that is as people come and go, you don't have to remember what the last guy did. You can just put him in this place and then he's done. And like you said, you have some groups that have 1 or 2 people. So what? Again, you don't have to think about it. If that person leaves and somebody fills their shoes, you don't have to remember, oh, this app that's like so obscure over here, they want it on a Friday and you're on vacation and now you have to log in to give it to them because you didn't account for it. So I am all with you, Tyler. Good job on this app.
Thank you. And, I mentioned like, we have a director, she's in a group of 1. But we do have situations where like, well, we hire a new director before the old one leaves so that there can be some transfer. So then there would technically be 2 people in that group, right? So it gives you a lot of flexibility, I think, as well, or enough flexibility. Not as much flexibility, obviously, as managing individual users, but certainly, I think it's the right way to go once you cross a certain threshold. Oh, and Jim mentioned SSO. So my solution was it was based. So MIT has SSO as well for orgs where they're using kind of like a username password to log in. I can't test that. So the whole kind of like I mentioned that when I run that provision user API, it creates the user ID. My assumption is that will be true for you too, if you're not using SSO, but I can't say for sure. I can only say basically on, what I have the ability to test it on. That was one thing that occurred to me. I was like, is this going to be weird because we're using single sign-on? I can't really speak to that, but I can tell you that it does definitely, what I presented to you today does work for single sign-on because that's what we use.
Yeah, I agree. I think that there might be an issue with that ID getting provisioned until the user actually registers in the app because they don't have a login yet until they go and click the invitation and then it opens up a prompt and it tells them you must use a password and username and all that blah 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 and then they get the ID. So there could
Yeah,
be an order of operations in that scenario where you'd run into problems.
yeah, exactly. I had that same exact thought. When I was initially setting this up, one of the things I thought of was like, well, if they don't get a user ID until they actively go into Quickbase, I'm going to have to rethink this. I had to test it out. I will tell you, one of the tough things about testing this out is that I don't have admin rights. I just have like app, app manager rights. So I can't add and delete people from MIT Quickbase, right? So when I provision someone, that's it. I can't provision them a second time. So that was challenging because I would have to literally have to wait until we hired somebody. And then I'm like, cross your fingers. I'm going to try this out and see if it works. And then it wouldn't. And I'm like, man, what went wrong? And then I'd have to wait until we hired somebody else. And that would be like several months later. So that it took me a while to get to this point. But I can say for certain that when you run that provision user API, at least within single sign-on, the user does not need to log into the app. They don't need to interact with Quickbase at all. It will generate an ID. Wouldn't it be the same if you invited somebody by email? Yeah, you would have to test it out. Like I said, this is because we have single sign-on. This is what worked for me, and I'm definitely one of them. I'm like, now that it works, I'm gonna ride this. I'm not gonna change it too much. But yeah, I would be interested to see if other people tried this solution, and they don't have single sign-on. If it had different behaviors, you may need to think of some workarounds.
Great. Yeah, awesome questions. Any more questions for Tyler or comments? Well,
Really
overall,
cool.
this was really great. Very eye-opening, clever. We could tell you spent a lot of time really reiterating and iterating various versions. I can only imagine how much time did you spend to get to this point?
Well, like I said, it was a situation where like I had to constantly find people who didn't have Quickbase access yet to test that whole provision user step. And I don't know, I went through at least a half a dozen people, made a lot of mistakes to get it right. But that's why I'm sharing it with you guys. So I can share my insights. And then hopefully, like I said, either you use it and it works, and that's great. Or you can, it doesn't quite work how you expect, but you can use it as a launch pad, right? Don't reinvent the wheel. Don't, you don't have to repeat my mistakes specifically. And yeah, it's so basically it took a couple of months at least to get it through the testing. And it wasn't like it was one of these where, I'm like working on it nonstop. It was just like, oh, we hired somebody. And I'm like, can we sit down and try this thing out? And then it wouldn't work, right? So it's like, I spend like a day on it and then I have to take a break for a couple of months and then go back to it.
Looks like you're reading Dwight's comment. Okay.
Yeah. So, yeah, other people have different types of provisioning methods. I think if your organization has something already automated, that's amazing. So here at MIT, basically only people who are going to be using the apps are, provisions. So it's on a department basis. MIT is a big place. We got thousands of people. So we're not just adding everybody that starts employment here, and it's only people who need access. So it's kind of ad hoc, but yeah. Jim mentioned, most of the time spent on this stuff is learning. I, spend an insane amount of time just like Googling things or, well, I guess now typing things into AI. Like, how do you do this thing? But, testing things, that's trial and error. It's a very time-consuming process.
Agreed. Well, we appreciate you doing all that time, spending the time to figure this out and sharing your knowledge, because you'll be saving other people time.
Yeah, no,
doing
hopefully
it,
it's
right?
worthwhile.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's always nice. All right. Yeah, if there's any other or are any other questions, we can always end it early. I should have had a poll ready to go, but it's all good. We can do it at another time. I actually got something really cool where you don't have to go to a separate page to do Menti. I can like launch it in Zoom. I haven't done it yet, so that's on me. I will probably try to do it at the next meetup. So we're gonna have 3 virtual meetups in March. We've got the app builders, we've got a general construction app logistics one March 10th and 11th. And then on the 17th, because the end of the March, I'll be on vacation. So we're pushing the pipelines meeting up a week earlier, and we're going to be doing a 90-minute breakout session with a bunch of subject matter experts. It's going to be a whole new kind of style. Ben and I and Maria are working on the logistics, but when you attend it, we will be, I guess, herding you into different groups. So it's going to be fun. I'm excited for it. We've got some really great people that have signed up. We've got Kokila, we've got Andrew Carbajal Everest, we've got Daniel Callahan coming to speak. So these are all some really smart folks that are excited to come and share with everybody during that time for the next pipelines group. So just FYI. Yeah, so, oh, and Jim just did a drop if anybody wants to join the Portland crew. Jim, you have a hybrid group. You could meet with us online or in person if you happen to be in Portland. I know Tammy has crashed the party a couple times. It's always fun to have her. So she's logging in at 6 p.m. Her time to connect with us. So it's always fun. You can always come and hang out even if you're not in the area. It's a very fun and welcoming group. All right. Yes, and please submit G2 review if you would like $35 off your next Amazon purchase. This is a good way to do it. Thank you very much for posting the link again, Ben. Appreciate it. And any updates from Maria about your birdie that's been climbing all over you before we end here?
I have one in another room who's jealous that he's not here. So I'm going to go back on mute now.
Okay, good. All right, everybody. Well, I want to thank everyone for joining. Thank you so much, Tyler, for this really comprehensive use case here. I'm excited to share your deck and get the recap out. Everyone will get that in the next 24 hours. Obviously, if you have any questions or would like to know more about any upcoming events or would like to speak at an upcoming Qrew meetup, please reach out. We're always looking for new people to share use cases. So thank you very much and have a good rest of your day. Take care.
Thanks.